Hello, hello, hello. Hey everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining. Once again, having a lovely Sunday here in Mumbai. It's getting a little cold, but Mumbai cold, as some of you might know, is not really cold. It's around 25 degrees Celsius, and that's cold for us. Today, I want to talk about economies of open source. So we'll focus most of the time there. Let me it's always hard to find music. Let me just reduce it as much as I can. Can you all hear me? Let me just check who all are here. Meanwhile, I'll put up the agenda as well. I have written agenda for this session. I want it to be a bit more organized. Share screen. I want to share a window. There you go. Does this work? Yeah, I'll zoom in. It's always hard to find layouts. So from next week, I'll use OBS Studio so that it's easy for me to find layouts. No, I don't like this. Maybe this is fine. Yeah. So economics of open source. What do I mean by that? I think there's a lot of different ways of looking at open source. When you're in college, when you're out there, and I just wanted to cover those. I wanted to cover how do engineers look at open source in college? How do you look at it when you're an employee? And how do companies look at it, right? And in terms of companies, there are also a lot of different sort of companies. How do startups look at it versus how does big tech and how does enterprise look at it? It's fascinating and how stark these perceptions are. So let me ensure it's going everywhere. Sorry. Yes, it's going everywhere. And I will also open the comments on over here because last time the comments took about a minute or two to show up, and that was not good. Mm, okay, so I can see comments here. So let's dive into it. Um, well, this is again, I know I dumped my ideas, and this is what ChatGPT gave me, but this helps me kind of set the context. So when I was early, right, and I talk about this in my blog post, I used to be very like when I joined the college, I had some time to figure out what's really going on, right? So the year of 2014 was when I started college, and in 2015, as you can see, I started contributing. So 2014 was nil. There was nothing in there. 2015 was when I started, and I learned about this program called Google Summer of Code, and that basically changed everything. Uh, Let me also. I think my mic is not set up correctly. Yep. I've been using MacBook mice so far. Let me fix it. check 1 2 3. This should be fine. Can anyone confirm? Are you able to hear me all right? I think this should be fine. Yeah, this is fine. I will. Yeah. Okay. Sorry for the distraction, but now let's dive into it. So as I was saying, 2015 was when I started, looking into Google Summer of Code, um, and this is when I found out about it. And so Google Summer of Code is a program. It's like a online internship. There are a lot of projects that you can get started with, and this is what I did to get started. And it was very interesting. So I did not like any sort of. Let me fix this. How do I? Hmm. I'm not a fan of this layout though. That's something I will say. Is this okay? Maybe. I think this is fine. I'll use this. So GSOC is started, and everyone. No one in my college was really applying for it except a few senior of mine, and my own brother was applying for it. So I found out about GSOC, and I wanted to apply, and I looked at some of the projects that have previously been a part of GSOC, right? Um, do they have 20? It's okay, they have. So they didn't have this website. So 2016, I will definitely be here. Can I search for my own name? So this is not a project, right? So my project was under Python Software Foundation, and over here, they have the list. So can I search? There must be a lot of people in here. Let's see. Manchu, no. OrkoHunter, no. Maybe it was not 2016, or maybe it's not here. Um, yeah. So, but you can look at the past programs and you can see who projects participated, and those are the projects which kind of apply every year. So I started contributing to this. So this was the first time I got introduced to open source, right? Like how I looked at it was a way to change my career, and just do something more than just sitting in my room and attending classes and all. So that's the first thing. Let me start drawing, right? So let's say this is open source, right? And then you've got like a student, right? College student. So why does a college student do open source? Most of the time, it's so that you can um, learn. That's the biggest reason. That you want to learn about learn programming, contribute, make an impact, feel good. It helps you in your career, helps with career, right? um I guess that's the reason why everyone contributes, right? Anything else that anyone would like to add? Yep, so that's one. Thanks, Carlos. Hey, good to see you. So the next reason is when you would want to work on open source as a employee. So now let's say you are a employee and you would contribute to open source. Let me write contribute. Now this is extremely rare. Employees contributing to open source is like usually it's I don't know, like you would want to do it as upskill, passion. These are all the reasons. The reason is you already have a 9 to 5 job, you work 5 days a week. When would you find time to contribute? So, employee contribution, like let's say, let me be called a hired engineer, I don't know, like an actual engineer contributing to open source is rare. Now, there's other forms of contribution. So then there is a the employee who contribute, like what really works is engineer who's contributing is when your company organization using the project. So this is when using the project for business. So now you have a business reason to contribute, and this actually works. Let me also suggest some like a color wise. This is green. Oh, actually, it did everything. Let me put the green stroke. This is a red stroke. This is a green one. So this works. Now let's say you are. So this is contribution. Like, you know, all of this that I've talked about here is contribution. Now contribution is different than maintenance. Contribution. Maintenance. Yep. Let's use the blue color here. Now, when does anyone maintain open source project, and who does it? So now you have startups, large companies. Well, I don't want to say enterprises, but I want to say big tech. And then we've got enterprises. This is, again, very rare. This doesn't happen that frequently. This happens a lot, and this happens a lot. There are other groups which does it, and they are called software foundations. OSS foundations. So OSS foundations would include your Apache Software Foundation, Linux Foundation, and so on, etc. This is also non-profit foundations. So this happens a whole lot, right? Enterprises would be your banks, etc. Big tech would be your Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, Spotify, Netflix. And startups would be your MongoDB, HashiCorp, Grafana. They're not really startups, but they're big startups now, right? So there you go. Now you got the both layers, the maintainers and the contributors. Yep. All good so far? Everyone with me? Okay. So when you're a student, you think, okay, now it's going to help me. Like, I really love open source, and then not everyone likes it, just to be honest. That a lot of people actually find it very difficult to go out there and contribute. They just cannot engage, cannot find their first project. It's um, yeah, it feels very it feels very difficult. So, but people who like contributing, they want to continue working on it because it's so fun. All of their work is open. They get to build a profile. They get to, yeah, they're actually learning things that matter, and maybe that will help them find their job, and so on. So that is good. Now, but when you land, like, what happens when you actually find a job, right? This is the most common scenario, that you transition from a student to engineer. This is where like 95% people are stuck. That they go from here to here. You think that I would continue to work on open source, but it doesn't happen because your company doesn't actually, like, it's not that they don't want you to contribute, it's just that that's not the main business opportunity that they have. So what do you do? So it's okay, like, let's talk about that for a bit. I realized that, so my first company, it was, I didn't contribute anything to open source, and that was perfectly okay, because I was solving user problems, customer problems. And if you solve problems, open source is also about solving problems. You have something in science, something in tech, you make something that's useful for others. It's just a different way of building, right? Open source is, there's no real money, no real drive. Everyone comes together and pitches idea, and it's all driven by passion, while business is all driven by goals. And in fact, a lot of the times people find it easier to work in an environment where they can yeah, like, they can work on problems, and get enough funding, have a large team. You get to work daily on the project moves fast, you get to learn fast. It's not a big deal. I'm not saying that this is a bad move. It's perfectly fine, but a lot of times people get bored. So if you're looking for contribution, if you're looking to contribute to open source projects, find teams within your company who are using an open source project to build a business. Because now it's the incentive of the business to actually take control of the project and ensure that it's moving in a direction that is not impacting the business. So if you want to contribute, then you need to find these teams. But I want to spend a lot of time talking about these, like the companies who do open source, right? So when I was at Twitter, which is big tech, I found out about something called an open source program office. It's a newish term. Not a lot of people know about this, but open source program offices are pretty much everywhere in these large tech. And even, in fact, even Google Summer of Code is run by Google's open source program office. So what do they do? They are pretty much oops, my table just moved up. um, they're pretty much in charge of ensuring that the company is using the right open source software. The company does not have any issues, legally speaking, contributing to this software. And overall improving this, like, the processes, helping the employees do their work and not have to worry about the logistics of contributions, like how do we manage access to GitHub, because that's where most people do open source. How do we do open source marketing and such? So that is yeah, that is why they exist. So I learned a lot, like, hey, it's not that fun. Like, in companies, you can't just really contribute. because you're under the employee agreement. So you need to be able to get a sign off that you want to contribute and you want to use the business hours to actually work on these projects. So this is where OSPOs help. You don't have to worry about it if you're in a startup. You do have to worry about it when you're in a big tech, because if, let's say, Google is contributing to some project, the project can just take that, hey, Google is using my project. Google's marketing may not like it, right? Like, if are we really using it? Is one person using it? Is like, what's the benefit that they would get, etc. That's just how they work. So that was an interesting realization. So then I went to Spotify, and that basically changed everything, because then I moved from here to here. I was one of those people who were working on open source full time from the company. And it was very interesting to learn about why would a company do this. So let me tell you a story of why Spotify decided to open source Backstage, which is, I mean, if you don't know, this is Backstage. It's a pretty famous project helping. It's a framework to build internal developer portals, and it's a CNC project. So if you look at Spotify's GitHub, Spotify, you'll find that there are a few projects, but nothing actually got as famous as Backstage. And in one of the projects you will find is called Helios. Then let's say Sticks. And well, it was not called gRPC. So let's just sort this based on number of stars. So Luigi is fine. This is fine. Yeah. So let me just tell you about Helios. You know what Helios does? Docker container orchestration platform. What does that tell you? Have you heard of this project? This was their Kubernetes. So they worked on this. You know, a lot of engineers worked on it. They used it internally, and they had to replicate it because Kubernetes got open source. This was before Kubernetes era. I'll tell you more things. There's a time series database. Let me just public archive, right? That would can I do that? Archive, yeah, that'd be fun. I can directly find those out. And now I can sort by stars. So Apollo was one of their projects. I think it's still used somewhere, but they no longer use it. You know, they have other frameworks to use. Heroic is a time series database, and I mean, obviously they must have switched to something else, and that's why I decided. But the story that I want to tell you that is that they created a lot of these projects for handling their own gRPC, like Spotify's Linux kernel for Debian-based system. Like, why would you even do things? But companies do that. Companies really go out and workflow definition library called Flow. Like Argo CD replaced this. You've got, I'm pretty sure there was a gRPC library somewhere. There was also like their own Docker that they had created. So companies do, like these large companies do create these projects and they have to deprecate them. And this is where they decided, nope, We can't have yet another project which is not the open source standard. And why do they deprecate them, by the way? Just, why can't Spotify continue building on Helios, or would have continued building on Helios? Because there's not enough people. There's a lot of training that they have to do, so they have to educate everyone about it before they hire, or after they hire someone. Then the project is moving, as like the Kubernetes project is moving so fast that you can't really keep up with it, so you have to deprecate it. That's the pretty much another reason why would you do it. So with Backstage, they had something and they realized that there's no open source project outside. Well, actually, there was. If you search for Lyft, and if you look at Clutch, this is what they had created from Lyft, which was their open source portal. They haven't talked about Backstage here, but when they started, they thought they would win over Backstage. Yeah, it's very interesting. So it also becomes a competition, right? That you don't want other companies to create their own standards, because if they do, then they don't have to bear the cost of remodernizing their architecture. But and Spotify has invested a lot in Backstage, right? Like they have hundreds and hundreds of engineers who have contributed to Backstage. They have so much that has been built on this, so they would want this to be open source and out there. And they won with Backstage. This is the de facto open source project for developer portals. So that is one of the reasons they want to do. So let me start writing. Why big tech does open source? Create standards, avoid rewrites, and overall less employee training. Example: Backstage, React from Facebook, etc. And then obviously community driven faster progress. So these are some of these projects, right? There's many other reasons. So this is one, that you don't want to rewrite this. The other reason would be that you want to improve your hiring brand. So trust me, hiring at their scale is extremely competitive, even for them. Why would someone move across the ocean and join their company and maybe accept their pay scale, whatever it might be, good or bad? Why would someone do it? Like, the brand has a role to play. So doing open source helps them. Imagine this. Today I tell you, would you be able to join a company called Corp X? If you've not even heard the name, you would say no, or you would say, what is it? But if you've heard these names, then it becomes very easy for you to make the decision, and it works in favor of these companies. Now, that's one reason, is that they want to build the hiring brand. Now, with that being said, I want to talk about the real the secret sauce here, which no one talks about, which is set the standards, or actually I would use the word control the open standards. So what do I mean about this? I don't know how many of you know about this. Digital rights management, DRM. So DRM is a technology that is implemented in browsers to actually ensure that the intellectual property um, is kept. So let's say you're watching a Netflix movie, you will find that like you should not be able to download. So how does that work? Like if you're looking at something in your browser, if you're listening to a song, it's in your browser, so you should be able to see the file, you should be able to download the file. That has been how the web works, um, but something changed. And in order to do this, companies like Apple and Netflix and Spotify would say yes because that helps their business model. So let's talk about committees. Have you heard of something called? Let me see if I remember the name. T43. I think it's called TC43 or something. TC4, Committee Behind JavaScript. I misspelled committee. Oh, TC39. So TC39 is a group of people who write down the spec of how JavaScript should be implemented. And you want to see who all are part of this committee? Where do I see the members? Members of TC39. You can find it in like one of the specs. Oh, is this it? I mean, it will be very hard to look from here. Yeah. The companies have signed the registration form for TC39 Royalty Free Technical Committee on the following: Apple, Google, Microsoft, obviously, Meta, NPM itself is there, Shopify is there, Twitter used to be there, but they're like, we're too busy doing other things, and then they pulled out. Then there is W3C committee. Members of the W3C. Okay, that's a lot of a lot of companies. So you see how like these committees are also built of companies, not people. It's very different than like the rest of their projects, right? Where the projects are driven by people, they are the maintainers. Here, if you leave the company, you pretty much don't have any control over the project. So it's employee driven maintenance. Let's say, let me see if Spotify is here. I mean, I'd be. So, it's not. Shopify looks like Spotify shifted its focus on more like CNCF rather than these. Pretty sure Netflix would be here. Yep. Okay. So one of the reasons why they do this is to push for standards that will help their business and get a seat at the table. How do you get a seat at the table? You need to be a contributor. And that's one of the reasons why these companies open source software, so that they get a seat at these tables for these committees and kind of dictate where the standards and open standards and codes go. It's pretty fascinating. These guys are playing the game at a very different level. It's it's more than just creating PRs and reviewing PRs. Okay, so we talked about that. We talked about helping, like using it to help you advance your career. We talked about like the engineers versus students and how you contribute. We talked about OSPOs. We talked about why do companies do the open source. We talked about the influence. Now let's talk a bit about Kubernetes for a second. So here's another thing, right? You know the how Google Cloud versus AWS, right? It's again just for everyone's notice, AWS is the largest player in cloud. It's well known. Like it could be like easily like majority player, and you know what majority means. So it's a majority player. Now Google Cloud, when it was starting, let's see, when did it start? Google Cloud. Well, actually, it launched in 2008. I'm very surprised. A lot of people had no idea Google Cloud launched this early. But I remember personally when like Kubernetes came, it was from Google, right? Let's say launch of GKE. I think it was like around 2015, right? Launch of EKS. Let me ask ChatGPT. When was EKS launched? 2018. So what are GKE and EKS? GKE is Google's Kubernetes engine. So you host your clusters over there and they help you manage that. EKS is AWS's. And you see the difference? It's 3 years. In these 3 years, Google Cloud captured so much of market just because they were part of the Kubernetes project. They open sourced it and they kind of changed the game. Now AWS has caught up, and like now it doesn't make a lot of difference, but the market share that Google Cloud got was a lot of it was because of Kubernetes. So I remember in one of the companies they were migrating off of AWS to Google Cloud just because Google Cloud had better support of Kubernetes. So that's another reason why would you do this, is because you would want to outplay your competitors. And you see this everywhere. You see this at React versus Angular. Different companies maintaining their own frameworks and trying to outcompete others. Because Facebook wants to do React. It has invested in a lot in React. It would not want their web engineers to rewrite everything in Angular or Vue. So that happens. Now, it's very interesting to note that. Let's talk a bit about foundation. So let's say if you look at React, GitHub React. Oh, actually, I do want to talk about Microsoft. So if you see, React is not its own project. It's part of Facebook's GitHub org, which means Facebook is the maintainer. It's not donated. It's very different for, let's say, Backstage, right? Let's say Backstage is not Spotify/Backstage anymore. It is part of the CNCF. The trademarks belong to Linux Foundation, does not belong to Spotify anymore. But it's different for React because Facebook has not given up on React. Let me guess. VS Code. Do you think it's owned by some organization or some non-profit? You can sense it. It's still owned by Microsoft. Even though VS Code is an open source editor, it's owned by Microsoft. And that is why Microsoft gets to push the things that it pushes, which is Copilot and everything. Like they're all Microsoft, um, yeah, Microsoft tools, and now Microsoft owns GitHub, so GitHub, VS Code, Microsoft all get to play this game together. And that is big because then you can't, like, you can do whatever you want to do with VS Code pretty much, like, um, even though it's open source, whatever. Microsoft can do whatever it wants to do in VS Code and no one will stop it. Similarly, Facebook can do whatever it wants to do with React and no one will stop it. So this is why when you use these projects, you should be very, very careful. Because let's look at Terraform. I don't know if you remember Terraform, what happened with Terraform lately. So Terraform was owned by, is still owned by HashiCorp. And Terraform created this infrastructure as code revolution where you could define your infrastructure as code. Very recently, well, not very recently, about a few, like a year ago or 2 years ago, they changed the license from Apache license, which is an open source license, to something called business source license. Now, business source license is not an open source license. And Terraform was like not Terraform was not the first. It was actually, they started with Elasticsearch, where Elasticsearch kind of changed the license and just said, we want to do our own license, and then for all of its projects. This is not an open source license. All the And you can't just come out and change the definition of open source. Let's just be very, very clear. It has a certain meaning that the code is open. You can do whatever you want to do with the code. There are certain permissible licenses, such as like Apache, MIT. They're very permissible licenses. There are some strict licenses like GPL and such, which say that you can, if you use it, then your code also has to be GPL. Which I think is, I think Linux and all in these 90s era, they were very strict open source licenses. Now it has become permissible, but now you cannot differentiate. No, like this is basically differentiating between who is using the project, and based on that, your licenses are different. So these are not open source licenses. Don't let them tell you. These are open core licenses, that your code is open, but it's not really open in the sense that you can do whatever you want to. You're not really free to do that. So it goes against the basic philosophies. And there are a lot of projects like this. You'll find even Mongo is SSPL. Yes. Yeah. So before 2018, and they had this license. Now the thing is, and Terraform has received a lot of controversy and is losing customers front, right, center because of this. And then that's where OpenTofu came in, which forked Terraform and kept it as open source, and then donated it to CNCF, and now you can see it's just killing it out there. So this will happen. So this is why company-owned open source projects are kind of weird, and that's why they donate it to foundations like CNCF, Apache Software Foundation, Linux Foundation, so on. By the way, Apache Software Foundation is one of the oldest, and there's a lot of Apache Software Foundation. I think everyone who touches tech, I think it's something like 90% of them uses a software maintained by Apache Software Foundation. It's huge. So that's why, if you see a project which is owned by a non-profit foundation, there's a proper governance in place. There's still some caveats, like you'll still find veils in those. For example, someone will say that this is a CNCF project, but you can clearly see which companies control the project for their own benefits. You just need to look at the maintainers guide, and you'll see that, hey, this is really not collaborative. It's just one company doing whatever it wants to do. But most of the projects, especially these two that I've listed here, they are very open and have a very good governance rules in place. Lastly, enterprises, they don't do open source. They don't want to. Like it's a big. So enterprises have so much compliance rules in place, and they have to, that these things are luxury. Like, they just can't keep up with. Like, it's secure by not doing much. That's their philosophy. Secure by being slow. Secure by like hiding it. That's the design. It's okay. I'm not blaming enterprises that they don't do open source. Well, actually, and by do, someone can say, hey, we distribute. No, I mean proper open source projects which are on their own, and you welcome other contributions. Because I mean, they would just simply say that, why are we helping our competitors by writing code? They just think very differently. Lastly, startups, it's just marketing. MongoDB got the attention because of being open source, and similarly all these projects, because they were open source, and then they form a company out of it, and then they change the license. Very, very clear pattern that you will see. Any open source license, any open source plan that you see is just a first step to its commercial license. So if you're using it as a just for your own project, then you do. Otherwise, you can just you should not trust them a lot. I'm seeing some spam on Twitch. I'll stop streaming to Twitch in a while. This is what I wanted to cover today, and yeah, I mean, it's open source is just free marketing for them at that point. They're getting others to contribute to their business plans. So yeah, just to wrap up, you see, open source, students get involved because they want to learn and grow. Then they get placed in a company which has no business incentive to contribute, but if the company uses the project, then they get to contribute. Then you got big tech who wants to set the standards and kind of do their business, play their business games and improve their branding. They do open source. You've got these guys who do it for free marketing, just to survive. These guys don't care. These are the true open source. This is where it all started, right? These are your 90s open source guys who started this freedom movement. But yeah, now I feel the challenge has always been, so I don't just screen share now. The challenge has always been that what is sustainable? Because if you just do open source out of passion, then it's not sustainable. And if businesses are using that, then it's risky. So sustainable business model is definitely when a company is using it for business, but then again, setting up correct governance in place. So that's my TED talk. Thank you for joining. And I have to drop early today, but yeah, see you next weekend. If there's any questions that you have, feel free to share. Otherwise, have a great